just beyond the bright lights of Las Vegas, held back by one of the most famous dams ever built, lies the largest reservoir in the United States. Lake Mead is a vast body of water in the desert, a man-made marvel that stores the water of the Colorado River and delivers it to millions of people, and for generations it stood as a symbol of humanity's ability to tame a river and make the desert bloom. But in recent years, Lake Mead has been sending a very different kind of message. The lake has been falling, its surface dropping lower and lower, its shorelines retreating, and around its edges a series of stark and unmistakable warning signs has appeared, signs that are becoming harder and harder to ignore. A pale band of bare rock now rings the lake where the water used to be. Boat ramps and marinas that once sat at the water's edge are now stranded far from it. Long submerged features are emerging from the shrinking waters, and the numbers that measure the lake's health keep sliding toward thresholds that carry serious consequences. This is the story of Lake Mead, of why it keeps falling, of the warning signs gathering around it, and of what those signs mean for the millions of people who depend on this great reservoir in the desert. It is a story worth understanding because the fate of Lake Mead is tied to the future of the entire American Southwest. Quick honest word before we dive in. A lot of people watch these all the way through, love them, and forget the one small thing that keeps a channel like ours going: hitting subscribe. If you are finding this important, take 1 second and subscribe right now. It genuinely matters for us and costs you nothing. And drop your state or country in the comments so we can see who is watching. Alright, let's begin. What Lake Mead really is, to understand why the falling of Lake Mead matters so much, you first have to understand what this reservoir is and how much it does. Lake Mead was created by the construction of Hoover Dam, the great dam that spans the Colorado River on the border of Nevada and Arizona, and when it fills, it is the largest reservoir in the country by the volume of water it can hold. It is not a natural lake, but a vast store of the Colorado River's water, held back behind the dam to be released in a controlled way to serve the needs of the region below. This storage is the whole point of the reservoir, because it allows the water of the river to be saved in wet years and drawn upon in dry ones, smoothing out the natural variability of the river and providing a reliable supply even when nature does not cooperate. The water held in Lake Mead serves an enormous population and a vast area. It supplies a major share of the water for the desert cities of the region, including the millions of people who live in and around Las Vegas, and it delivers water to farms and cities across the lower part of the Colorado River Basin, reaching into multiple states and even across the border to Mexico. The dam that holds the lake also generates hydroelectric power, using the force of the water to produce electricity for the region. Lake Mead, in other words, is not merely a scenic body of water, but a critical piece of infrastructure, a linchpin of the water supply for a huge swath of the Southwest, and its health is directly tied to the well-being of the millions who depend on it. When such a reservoir begins to fall, it is not a minor curiosity, but a signal of profound importance. It is worth appreciating the sheer scale of what Lake Mead represents when it is full, because that scale is what makes its decline so striking. At capacity, the reservoir stretches for many miles behind the dam, filling the canyons of the Colorado with a vast expanse of water in the middle of one of the driest landscapes in North America, a startling sight of deep blue against red desert rock. It was designed to hold several years' worth of the river's flow, a buffer so large that it could carry the region through extended dry periods without the taps running dry. That such an immense store of water could be drawn down as far as it has been is a measure of how severe and how sustained the pressures on it have become. Because a reservoir of this size does not empty quickly or for trivial reasons. The decline of a body of water this large is the work of years of imbalance, and the fact that it has fallen so far is precisely why the warning signs command such attention. The bathtub ring that tells the story, the most visible and famous of the warning signs around Lake Mead, is a feature that has become an icon of the water crisis in the West, the bathtub ring. As the lake has fallen over the years, it has left behind a broad band of pale, bleached rock along its shorelines, a light-colored ring that marks the mineral deposits left on the canyon walls by the water that once stood there. This ring is a direct, physical record of how much the lake has dropped, a line drawn across the rock showing where the surface used to be. And as the water has continued to fall, the ring has grown taller and more dramatic, a widening band of bare stone that speaks silently but powerfully of the decline. The bathtub ring has become a symbol precisely because it is so easy to see and so hard to misunderstand. Anyone who visits the lake or sees a photograph of it can grasp immediately what the ring means. The water was once up there, and now it is down here, and the distance between the two is enormous. It is a warning sign that requires no expertise to read, a visual measure of the crisis that has made the abstract numbers of water levels real and tangible for millions of people. The growing ring is a constant reminder of the reservoir's decline, and it has done more than perhaps any chart or statistic to bring home the reality of what is happening to Lake Mead. It is the lake itself, writing its own warning on the walls of the canyon, in a language that everyone can understand. The numbers sliding toward the edge behind the visible bathtub ring lie the numbers that measure the lake's decline, and these numbers tell a story that is just as sobering. The level of Lake Mead is tracked closely, measured by the elevation of its surface, and over the course of the long drought that has gripped the region, that level has fallen substantially, dropping to elevations far below where the lake once stood and reaching lows not seen since the reservoir was first being filled. Each year of continued drought and reduced inflow has tended to draw the lake down further, and the trend has been a persistent and worrying decline, punctuated only occasionally by the temporary relief of a wetter year. What makes these falling numbers so serious is that they are approaching thresholds that carry real and severe consequences. As the surface of the lake drops, it moves toward levels at which the ability of Hoover Dam to generate hydroelectric power would be reduced and eventually lost, cutting off a source of electricity for the region. Below that lies an even more critical level, sometimes called dead pool, at which water could no longer pass through the dam to the areas downstream, a scenario that would be catastrophic for everyone who depends on the water being delivered. The decline of the lake toward these thresholds has transformed the falling numbers from a matter of concern into a matter of urgency. A countdown measured in the elevation of the water. These thresholds are why the warning signs cannot be ignored, because they represent the points at which the reservoir's decline would begin to break the systems that so many people rely on, and each foot the lake drops brings those points closer. What makes the numbers especially sobering is how they behave as the lake gets lower, because of the shape of the reservoir. Near the top, where the canyon is wide, a given drop in the surface represents an enormous volume of water. But as the lake falls into the narrower parts of the basin, the same loss of volume causes the surface to drop more quickly, so that the decline can seem to accelerate as the reservoir empties. This means that the closer the lake comes to the critical thresholds, the faster it can approach them for a given shortfall in water, a dynamic that adds to the urgency and that makes the later stages of the decline potentially more rapid than the earlier ones. The numbers, in other words, do not simply slide steadily toward the edge. They can gather pace as the lake shrinks, which is one more reason that the warning signs demand a timely response rather than a wait-and-see approach. Here is something I would genuinely love to know, and it takes 10 seconds. Have you ever visited Lake Mead or the Hoover Dam? Or seen that famous bathtub ring in person? Tell us in the comments, because hearing from people with a real connection to these places makes these videos better, and I read every reply. Okay, back to it. The intakes and the power at risk among the most concrete of the warning signs is what has been happening to the structures that draw water and generate power from the lake. Because as Lake Mead has fallen, these structures have been pushed toward and past their limits in ways that reveal the seriousness of the situation. The water supply for the Las Vegas area, for example, is drawn from the lake through intakes, and as the surface dropped, there was real concern about whether the higher intakes would be left above the water, prompting the construction of a new, deeper intake designed to keep drawing water even if the lake fell to very low levels. The very fact that such a project was necessary, an insurance policy against the lake dropping below the original intakes, is itself a powerful warning sign, a physical acknowledgement of how far and how fast the reservoir has been expected to fall. The generation of hydroelectric power at Hoover Dam is likewise at risk from the falling lake. As the water level drops, the pressure and volume available to drive the dam's turbines diminish, reducing the amount of electricity the dam can produce. And if the lake were to fall low enough, power generation would cease altogether. This clean, reliable source of electricity, long taken for granted, has become vulnerable to the decline of the reservoir, and the prospect of losing it is one of the serious concerns driving the response to the crisis. These threats to the intakes and the power generation are among the clearest signs that the falling of Lake Mead is not a distant or abstract problem, but one that is already forcing expensive engineering responses and threatening the essential functions the reservoir provides. They are the warning signs made concrete, written not in symbolism, but in steel and turbines, and the hard reality of infrastructure pushed to its limits. What the shrinking lake reveals one of the most striking and eerie consequences of Lake Mead's decline has been what the retreating waters have uncovered, because as the lake has shrunk, it has exposed things that had long been hidden beneath its surface, and these discoveries have become warning signs of their own kind. Features of the old landscape that were submerged when the reservoir filled have re-emerged as the water has fallen, along with objects and remnants that had settled to the bottom over the decades. And the appearance of these long-hidden things has captured public attention and driven home the scale of the decline. When a lake falls far enough to reveal what has been underwater for generations, it is an unmistakable sign of how much water has been lost. Alongside these discoveries, the practical landscape of the lake has been transformed in ways that serve as their own warnings. Marinas and boat launches that were built at the water's edge have been left stranded high and dry as the shoreline retreated, forcing them to be relocated, extended, or closed altogether. Docks that once floated on the water have come to rest on dry ground, and the recreation that the lake supports has been disrupted as the water has pulled away from the facilities built to access it. These stranded marinas and abandoned boat ramps are vivid, everyday evidence of the decline, visible to anyone who visits the lake and tangible in a way that abstract statistics are not. Together, the emerging features from the depths and the stranded infrastructure at the edges paint a picture of a reservoir in retreat, its shrinking made undeniable by the transformed landscape it leaves behind. These are warning signs that the lake writes across its own basin, revealing in the drying ground the true extent of what is being lost. Quick pause, because this matters and deserves to be seen. If you are getting value from this, tap the like button. It really does help the video reach more people. And if you have family or friends in the Southwest, or anyone who cares about where their water comes from, share this with them, because it is genuinely important to understand. One like, one share to someone you care about, and let's keep going. The millions who depend on the lake to grasp why the warning signs around Lake Mead are so serious, you have to remember who depends on the water it holds. Because the decline of the reservoir is not just an environmental or scenic concern, but a direct threat to the water supply of a vast population. The water stored in Lake Mead serves millions of people across the lower Colorado River Basin, supplying homes, businesses, and farms throughout the region. For the desert cities that draw from it, the lake is a foundational source of water, one whose reliability underpins the daily life of their residents. For the farms of the region, the water delivered from the lake irrigates crops that feed people far beyond the Southwest. The reach of Lake Mead's water extends across state lines and even across the border, making its health a matter of importance to a great many people. Because so many depend on the lake, its decline has triggered formal responses designed to share the shrinking supply, including official declarations of shortage that require the users of the water to reduce how much they take. These cutbacks fall on the states and users that draw from the lower Colorado, and they represent a direct, practical consequence of the falling lake. A translation of the warning signs into real reductions in the water available to farms and cities. The declarations of shortage are themselves among the most significant warning signs of all, because they mark the point at which the decline of the reservoir has moved from a looming threat to an active reality, forcing real reductions in water use across the region. They are a formal acknowledgement that there is not enough water to meet all the demands placed on the lake, and that the users must adjust to a new reality of less. Unlike the bathtub ring, these declarations speak in the language of policy and law, but they carry the same essential message, that the lake can no longer reliably give what it once so freely did. The millions who depend on Lake Mead are, in this way, already feeling the effects of its decline. and the warning signs around the reservoir are, for them, not a distant possibility, but a present concern. Why this matters beyond the lake. The falling of Lake Mead is significant not only for what it means to the reservoir itself, but for what it represents about the larger situation of the American Southwest. Because Lake Mead is, in a sense, a barometer for the health of the entire Colorado River system and the region that depends on it. The lake sits at the lower end of the river's great system of storage, collecting the water that flows down from above, and its level reflects the overall balance between the water coming into the system and the water being taken out. When Lake Mead falls, it is a sign that this balance has tipped, that more is being demanded of the river than it can sustainably provide, and that the entire system is under stress. The warning signs around the lake are, in this way, warning signs for the whole region. This is why the decline of Lake Mead has drawn such intense attention and concern, because it is understood to be a symptom of a deeper and broader challenge. The challenge of a river that is shrinking under the combined pressures of drought, a warming climate, and long-standing overuse. The lake's falling level is one of the clearest and most watched indicators of this larger crisis, a single number that captures the state of a vast and complex system. To watch Lake Mead is to watch the health of the Colorado River and the water security of the Southwest, and the warning signs gathering around the reservoir are a call to attention not just for those who live near it, but for everyone with a stake in the future of the region. The lake is telling a story that reaches far beyond its own shores. A story about the true limits of the water that sustains an entire civilization built in the desert. All right, I know, second time I am bringing this up, feel free to sigh at me. But quickly, if you have made it this deep into a video about Lake Mead, you clearly care about this stuff. And a lot of you who watch have not subscribed yet. That one tap genuinely tips the scales for a small channel like ours. No guilt, just a grateful ask. That is the last time. Promise. Let's finish. Reading the warning signs wisely as we bring this exploration to a close, it is worth reflecting on how we should read the warning signs around Lake Mead, because they call for a response that is neither panic nor complacency, but clear-eyed understanding and action. The signs are real and serious, the bathtub ring climbing the canyon walls, the numbers sliding toward critical thresholds, the intakes and the power at risk, the stranded marinas and the emerging features, the declarations of shortage and the cutbacks in water use. Together, they tell an unmistakable story of a reservoir under profound stress, and they deserve to be taken seriously as indicators of a genuine crisis. To ignore them would be to ignore a warning that the systems sustaining the Southwest are being pushed toward their limits. At the same time, the situation is not beyond hope, and the same attention that has made the warning signs so visible has driven real efforts to respond, through conservation, through agreements to reduce water use, through engineering to protect the water supply, and through the difficult work of bringing demand into line with the reality of a shrinking river. Lake Mead has fallen far, but the region has shown a real capacity to adapt, and the warning signs, precisely because they are so hard to ignore, have galvanized action that would not have come without them. In a sense, the very starkness of the signs is a kind of gift, a clear and unmistakable message that cannot be brushed aside, and the response to that message will determine whether the decline can be slowed and managed, or whether it will continue toward the most serious outcomes. The falling of Lake Mead is a warning, but a warning is also an opportunity, a chance to act before the worst comes to pass. The great reservoir in the desert is telling us something genuinely important. In a language written plainly on the canyon walls and in the retreating shoreline, and the wisest response is not to look away, but to listen, to understand, and to act on what it is so plainly telling us